I'm Jess Dakotas.
And I'm Nick Koziel. Welcome to That Sounds Terrifying, the podcast where we share terrifying stories, we share listener experiences, and we visit virtually some of the most haunted places in the United States and the world. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of That Sounds Terrifying. Super excited to have a guest with us this week, Kevin Hall, who's an author of Signs the Veil is Thinner Than We Imagine. So thank you for being on the show, Kevin.
Yes.
Thank you very much for having me. This is going to be great.
Yeah, it's going to be terrifying, terrifyingly great, right?
Yes.
But Kevin, why don't you just start off and just tell us a little bit about yourself, in the book, and then we can jump into, a tale.
Great. No problem. I'm one of these that do not mind Mondays coming around. I'm retired. And I retired probably 6, 7 years ago. I worked in two Fortune 500 companies here in Rochester. One being Eastman Kodak. I did that for about 18 years. And then when they downsized, I went over to Xerox and finished out my career over there. Background in computer science as well as project management. And had nothing but good times at both companies. And when I retired, what do I do for my next act? And that kind of came from my grandkids asking me the question, what were you like as a kid, Grandpa? And I kept hearing this, and I would tell them stories and thinking about, will they remember what I told them? I decided to put it down in written format. And that was kind of my journey into becoming an author. And now I've just released my third book. And as you mentioned, Nick, Signs the Veil is Thinner Than We Imagine.
Well, very nice. Very nice. And we got to chat a little bit beforehand. And so Jess kind of coming in blind here. Sorry, Jess. Um, but I just wanted to have you on this show. And we've even talked about having you on our sister podcast too, because you're on that line, right? So
Yes. Yes.
but why don't you just we're gonna put in the show notes, everybody, where you can acquire this book. We'll have a link straight to it. And Kevin, I'd love for you to share a little bit about maybe what made you think about writing this, and then again, we'll just jump into one of those great examples.
Sure. It actually started a number of years ago. Both my wife and I have had very interesting experiences where we would say, wait a minute, this is not normal. This is just not coincidence. There's something else here. And we've had a number of them since we've been married. And by the way, we're coming up on 48 years this April. So
Wow.
yes.
Congratulations.
Congratulations. Yeah.
Hey, she was the one, and we've been together ever since, and a couple of children and six fabulous grandchildren later. So
Yeah.
we're enjoying life.
Good.
So with those experiences, I'd kind of just file them away in the back of my mind. And then one day, or I should say 1 week, we had some very good friends of ours. My best friend from high school and his wife came for a visit. And one of these experiences happened right in front of them.
Hmm.
And after we saw what was going on, his wife Louise pulled out of her purse a little cardinal charm, and she put it in the place where this incident had occurred. And it had a little saying with it. And when we talked to her about it, she says she too has had some of these occurrences. And she carries these little charms with her, and she places them on the area where the incidents has occurred. And it's kind of like a very good omen to do that.
Hmm.
And as I started to dig into research into this book, come to find out the cardinal the reason for its, I'll call it mythology, but it really goes deeper and transcends many, many different cultures. And that is the red of its wings supposedly signifies the touch of Christ and Christ's blood. Now, I try in the book not to go to any one religion. And the reason I do that is there is so much in history of the veil being thin and how we can communicate with the other side, or actually how they can communicate with us. And there's been many, many instances of this going back to the Druids, the Egyptians, back during the days of the Roman and the Roman Empire, the Norse and the Viking lore, and just on and on. And when I started to study cultures, it's in China, it's in Japan, it was in the American Indian, and right here in New York State, the Iroquois Nation. There was so much out there that this book took me in areas that I never even imagined when I first thought about writing it. And even to the point where folks knew, some very close folks knew I was writing it, and they would send me some stories and say, look, maybe you want to check this out, or maybe you want to check that out. And I'm watching TV with my wife, and this was a year ago. We were watching Amazon Prime, and they had a show on Good Friday called On a Wing and a Prayer. And this was a release for them, and I was watching it, and it was about a gentleman who was at his brother's funeral with his family, and he had chartered a flight to take them back home after the funeral. Only 10 minutes into the flight, the pilot dies. He has to now take over. So after seeing that movie, I said, I got to get in touch with this guy and talk to him. And that's kind of a journey in itself to try to track these folks down. But I was able to, and then I tell their story within the book. But there's so much. And Nick and Jess, what I thought I would do is tell one of the stories. And you can actually get the full story of this on my website. It's a download that you can get, and it's just one of the stories. But I thought, because this sounds terrifying, I would go back to a little bit of my childhood and the old Rod Serling, The Twilight Zone. And I loved his opening monologues. So I thought I would kind of do a little homage to him and that show. And I started off with how he would start his shows. And he had several different startings to it, but the one I liked is, there is a fifth dimension beyond that which is known to man. It is a dimension as vast as space and timeless as infinity. It is the middle ground between light and shadow, between science and superstition, and it lies between the pit of man's fears and the summit of his knowledge. And to me, that just kind of encompasses, that's where this zone, if you will, this transfer of communications between the veil being thin, it's kind of at that place. And I challenge people within the book, are the stories I'm telling, which are true, I've interviewed the folks, are they coincidence? Are they happenstance? Or is this something more that you really need to understand? And as I got into the book, writing it further, it even took me back to my childhood, to where, wait a minute, I remember this happening. Was this something more? Was something directing and guiding me? And that's kind of where I want to begin this story. And this story happened, imagine, if you will, a summer or a fall day. It's September. The sun is bright. And you're driving into work at 7:30 in the morning, and you've got to be at your desk around 8:30. And the floor in which you operate, it's a floor that is open to a lot of folks that work there, but they do a lot of investments for other areas. And you arrive at your desk that morning, and it's a very calm morning. And you look out and the sun is bright. And then finally you hear a rumbling in the building next to you. You don't think a lot about it, but you look out the window and you see a ton of papers floating down by. Oh, and by the way, you're up on the 78th, 79th floor. What are all those papers doing? And then you get a phone call, and that phone call says, get up and get out of there. A building has been struck by a plane. You feel okay. You heard over the loudspeaker in your building, everything's safe. But you decide to get up and move around anyways to see what's going on. And as you leave, all of a sudden, another plane hits your building, wipes out the floor that you were just on. Everything is pitch black dark, smoke, flame, debris. Now you have to try to maneuver. Well, you hear the floor gentleman who's in charge of anything that's from a fire management perspective blow his whistle, and you all manage that are left to gather over near him. And he directs and leads you out of that floor into the hallway to a series of doors that can take you out of the building. And he chooses one, and you all start to go down. And as you're going down, you're met with folks coming up, and they're telling you you can't go down, except that you know you have to get out, and they're saying there's too much smoke and debris. You have to go up higher to get to fresher air. Well, in doing that, you also, one of the gentlemen you're with, hears somebody yelling from the room that's adjacent to the stairwell. He's trapped. And as that plane hit the building and the building swayed, it pulled some of the sheetrock away from the doorway, just enough so that you can continue ripping it and get inside. Only as the two of you start to go in, you become overfilled with smoke. You can't manage it anymore. You decide to go back into the hallway and head upstairs. You head upstairs, you manage to get to the 91st floor, and you look around, there's smoke, and you see people lying down. And almost in a sleep-like state, you're overcoming with smoke, you start to lay down. And as you lay down, you hear that voice say, get up and get out. What was that voice? Where did it come from? But you don't question it. You get up and you start to head down the stairs. You manage to get down to around the 69th floor, and you're met with all kinds of smoke, fire, debris. You don't even know if you can make it through. But again, that voice is there saying, go through and get out. Without hesitation, you go down through 3 floors that can only be described as hell. Fire, smoke, debris, but you manage through. And you get down further beyond those floors, and you're met with firefighters coming up. Those firefighters tell you keep going, that it's clear down below, and you can make it. And you continue going down. You make it to the 1st floor, you figure, oh, I'm gonna be safe. Except folks are there telling you, you cannot go out through the door. There's too much debris falling from overhead. You have to go through the underground concourse. Then go down through the underground concourse, only you meet up with a buddy. The buddy's limping along. That buddy is having a hard time, and you go over and you take his arm, and the two of you start to go out, and then you feel the rumble. The building shakes, the rumble comes down even more. You turn around, you see a fireball coming at you. And that's when you tell your buddy, run. And that's the last thing you remember until you wake up 3 days later in the hospital. You find out that you have a major gash to your forehead. You're burned over 60% of your body, and your contacts had fused to your eyes. Now the doctors managed to keep you alive, and the doctors managed to remove the contacts successfully. That is the story of Ron DeFrancesco. Ron was the last person to make it out of the Twin Towers on 9/11. And that's something we should never, ever forget. And that's the story that you can download the full version of. I kind of tried to tell it in the Rod Serling Twilight Zone approach.
Yeah.
You're a really good storyteller.
Yeah, you are. That was
I was
intense.
rooted.
Well, thank you much.
Yeah.
In talking with Ron and hearing his story, and Ron will tell you, he suffers survivor's guilt. Why was he
Mm.
left alive? Well, Ron was with another gentleman that day, Brian Clark. Is it Brian? Yeah, Brian Clark. And Brian was able to go into that room and rescue another individual. And I
Mhm.
tell Brian's story also in the book, as well as so many more. And it's just tremendous, the stories that I've heard from folks that were in the Twin Towers that day.
Mhm.
And I was working for Xerox at the time. And within a matter of minutes of the first plane hitting, we were all gathered in a conference room with the TV
Yeah.
on. And when the second plane hit, that was it. We were all released to go home.
Mhm.
So it's terrifying, but I try to tell these stories in a way that, in Ron's case, where did that voice come from?
Mhm.
Who was talking to him? And when I asked Ron that question, he told me point blank, an angel or God. That's the
Mhm.
only two things he can come down to.
Yeah.
And there's so many others of these stories out
Yeah.
there. One of the things I get into is several different ways that folks are communicated from the beyond. One of the ones is the dream state. And people might have heard of visitation dreams. And especially at end of life, there's a doctor right here in Buffalo, Dr. Christopher Kerr, who's chronicled over 1,500 end of life stories of the patients that he has in hospice care. And without doubt, about 80% of them see visions. My mom had dreams. My mother-in-law had dreams where folks would come to her and say, get ready, it's about time. But there's another story I tell in the book. I don't know if you all know the comedian Sam Kinison.
Mhm.
All right. Sam was killed in an automobile accident, but the accident left him in a state where he was taken to the hospital, and the doctors were looking at him and saying, well, this is serious, very serious, but we think he should pull through. While Sam is lying there with his brother next to him, he looks up kind of to the corner of the room and he says, no, I don't want to go. No. And then in a matter of just a few more seconds, he looks back up and says, oh, okay. And he was gone. Why? What was he talking to? Who was he talking to? So often we see these things and hear these things, and a lot of times we just dismiss them. Should we be thinking more about it? Is it deeper? Is there more to us and life than just the mortal body we live in? I believe it. I feel we have a hereafter, and let's look at it from a science perspective. Can you destroy energy? Our
Nope.
body is energy.
Yeah, Jess talks about that all the time in the show, right?
I do.
Yeah.
We can change the shape. We can change kind of the vial, but we can't destroy the energy. Where does that energy go? Who are we to judge? I just know in my feelings that I believe that there is an afterlife. I have seen all of our parents, and when I talk about parents, I talk about my mom and dad, as well as my mother-in-law and father-in-law.
Mhm.
We've seen them pass on, but we feel them. And we know there's at times, I'll give you an example. My brother also passed on early. He wound up, and we didn't know any of this. He had a heart condition. It was a valve issue. Come to find out, after he passed on, I go to the cardiologist. Sure enough, I got the same thing. And we don't know this, but it could have been what took my dad early. He was only 52 when he went.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And I appreciate that. But it was many, many years ago. I hate to say this, but my wife and I were on our honeymoon at that time.
Jeez.
Now, the good news is he was at our wedding,
Yeah.
and we have those photos. So we look back on that and we feel at peace. But as my brother passed away, we held his funeral. And after the funeral, we were going to have a get together, and we told everyone, come on back to Mom's house and we'll have a little get together there. So I drove my mom and my wife back to my mom's house. Now we're sitting in the living room, and it's just the three of us. Nobody else has arrived yet. And all of a sudden, one by one, we started to smell cigarette smoke. Undeniable, this is cigarette smoke. Nobody smokes. None of us smoked in the house. I get up, I look around outside. No one's there. I go upstairs, nothing. Where is this cigarette smoke coming from? Well, here's the thing. My brother smoked. My dad also smoked.
Mm.
Was that the two of them there?
Together.
Yeah,
Together?
smoking away. Joined joined
Yeah.
the family gathering, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then my sister, who lives down, I live here in Rochester. My mom lives in Ilion, New York, or did, she passed on. That's where my sister lives. So my sister went over to the house one day to visit Mom and make sure everything was fine. And Mom said, can you go upstairs and grab some fabric? She had her craft room upstairs, and bring it down. I want to do some things. So as my sister's going up the stairs go up and then make a 90 at a landing and continue up the rest of the way. She gets to the landing. All of a sudden, there's the cigarette smoke again.
Mm.
Where is this smoke coming from? Nobody smoked in that house.
Yeah.
So just those kinds of things. And I totally feel that's my brother coming to me, came to my sister, and, just letting us know everything is fine.
Mhm.
Don't worry about it, and we'll meet up again one day. I'm convinced of that. So that's my story. I hope the audience can, feel that it meant something to go through this. And in writing the book, I try to tell a lot of these stories, but I also put history into it. As I mentioned, the Egyptians, the Romans, the Druids, etc., cultures of China, Japan, India. I forgot about India's in there, and all their beliefs that they have. So there is a lot of this throughout history. Can all this be circumstance? Can it all be happenstance? I don't know.
Yeah.
Not for me. I don't believe that. So.
All right. Well, cool, Kevin. Thank you very
Thank
much for sharing
you.
everything. This
Yes.
is
Yeah.
amazing.
You're welcome.
So appreciate having you on the show.
Oh, I appreciate being here, and I have enjoyed listening to your podcast. I mean,
thank you.
some of them the stories do take me back to the Twilight Zone, and I try to put myself in that frame of mind and listen. So really
Awesome.
appreciate it.
So I have a question for you though. You mentioned that, the man in the Twin Towers who
Yes.
survived. He said he believed it was an angel or God that was speaking
Yes.
to him.
Yes.
When you speak to people who have these encounters, do you mostly hear people say, I think it was God or an angel, or it was my mom, or it was my dad? Who comes up the most, out of curiosity?
There is a variety of them, and sometimes they just reference them as being a vision.
Okay.
But I would say the most, and then I'll defer to Dr. Kerr's research. Most of it is a family member that come to them.
Yeah.
And these visions they do speak about could be, I won't say could be, are in their opinion angelic in nature.
Mhm.
And doing research for the book, most of the time it's not going to be God, it's going to be who God sends. And it could be anything. And I'm talking on a vision. I'll give you another quick little story. You've heard of the Carolina Reaper? The
Yes.
pepper?
Mhm.
Yes.
Okay. Well, you know, the gentleman has developed a new pepper called Pepper X.
Okay.
The
Mm.
Carolina Reaper is about 1.4 to 1.6 million Scoville heat units. The
Jeez.
Pepper
No.
X is 2.4 million.
Oh.
No thanks.
You know, that gentleman was a complete addict at a very young age,
Oh, jeez.
drugs and alcohol, until he saw a vision. He had lost his wife. He had lost many, many things, friends. And one day he wanted to stop the pain, and he gathered up all his drugs and alcohol to stop the pain. That's when he saw the vision. Almost 3 years later, he's complete sober. He's now down in South Carolina, and he's developed these peppers. He's in a Guinness Book of World Records. He is loving life. He is married. He's got children.
Nice.
It's just
Yeah.
phenomenal. And I tracked him down because I saw him first on a Mike Rowe podcast. And that's when I tracked him down and said, I got to dig in deeper into his story. And it's another really, really good one. And I wrote about it in the book.
That's so interesting. I have a story from a friend who is a recovering addict, who she actually woke up one morning and she was in just the depths of her addiction, and her friend had just passed from addiction. And she woke up and she sat up in bed and she was just like, I don't know what I'm going to do today. Wasn't feeling anything. And she said that she looked up and saw her friend who had just passed standing there at the end of her bed. And she said her name. I'm not going to share her name. But she said, so and so, you got to get clean. You're done now. And she said that that was the very moment. And she was like, I never used again.
Yep.
I went into rehab. I never used again. And I was fine. She's like, I got out of rehab. I didn't even want to use again.
Yes.
I was done. And I was like, how is that possible? You know, people fight addiction their entire lives.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it is I have such respect for people in recovery, such respect.
Absolutely. They're fighting the demons every day and
Every
they
day.
manage through it.
Right. I mean, to me, I liken it to like, do you want to live without anything sweet like sugar for the rest of your life? I couldn't do that. You know what I mean? Like that is a fight.
Yeah.
So they are very strong people. But she said, she was like, I almost feel like I kind of cheated because I never had that feeling again. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. Like when the divine touches you in a way,
Oh,
and
Yeah.
I grew up hearing stories like that as well. I've shared many times on the podcast that I grew up evangelical, and they like to tell stories of things like that. So, but I don't take away from those stories. I think that most of them are valid and true. So they like to talk about when the divine touches you, an angel came, and all of a sudden I was cured, and I think there's something to it.
yes. Yes.
So,
I definitely believe that.
yeah.
There's one other thing that I don't know if I knew this at the time, but I always thought purgatory and hell were similar.
Hmm.
Only from doing the research, purgatory really kind of came out of the word purge. And that's kind of a go-between where you go and you're met with, let's call them they're the spirit that guides you and manages you so that you can purge all of the bad out so that then you can move on.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you that was kind of an enlightening point for me when I was researching this book, and because I always thought, oh, purgatory, hell, all that kind of stuff. But very, very interesting, a lot of the research I had gotten into.
Yeah. Have a lot of the people that you've interviewed, has anybody mentioned hell?
Surprisingly, no, they did not. And one of the gentlemen, the one that was in the airplane, he could be a pastor. He is that much into the church, but he told me, he says, when you walk in the light, you have no fear. And so when he took over the plane that day, he said the angels were with him. He knew it. And I won't get into too much more because I want people really to get the
Of course.
book.
Yeah, read the book. Yes, you have to read the book,
Yeah,
people.
you heard it all on That Sounds Terrifying. You don't even need to get the book now. No, I think that it's great. I think definitely we're gonna have to get a couple copies ourselves.
Yes.
Absolutely. Would you like to hear some scary stories while you're on?
Yes, I would go for it.
Fantastic. Nick, would you like to start?
I can.
Perfect.
All right. So, this one was one of the other ones from my dad. So if you'd listened to the previous episode, you'll kind of know, and it kind of relates to what Kevin was talking on too. So this is about my grandmother actually. It all started out when they came out with the new flu shots years back. My mom thought that it'd be a good idea to get it. My parents went down to the doctors and had it done. A day or two later, my mom was complaining about weakness in her legs. She didn't feel right, and she was going to the emergency room that night. I didn't see her, but they admitted her in to do some tests. At first, they couldn't figure out what was going on. They did more tests and, of course, finally concluded she was having a reaction to the shots. The next day, she was diagnosed and contracted something called Guillain-Barré syndrome. Supposedly, 90% of the people recover after a while, but soon my mother was paralyzed from the neck down. Then she couldn't talk, so we used a form of sign language with her blinking her eyes for yes or no. She was in the hospital for about 3 months, and then she was having trouble breathing, so they put a machine on to help her. I visited every day, and after work and on the weekends. I noticed in her room, next to her bed, a cicada bug had planted itself. One day before leaving for the hospital, I stopped by the drugstore where I used to work as a teenager to pay a bill and to talk. Suddenly, I had a feeling come over me, and I looked at the clock on the wall and immediately said, I gotta go. See you later. As I arrived at the hospital, upon entering the elevator, 2 nurses that were always in my mom's room came out, gave me a strange and sad look when I cheerily said, Hi, how are you doing tonight? I went upstairs, and upon entering the room, I didn't see my mom's bed. I'd seen it had been moved, and the machines were all disconnected. My father's back was to me, and I said, Oh, she must be doing better. Everything's unhooked. My dad turned around and had tears streaming in his face. She had just died a short time ago. It must have been when I looked at the clock a short while earlier. So the arrangements were made that night, and the wake was to spread out over the next 3 days. The funeral and the mass the following day. My chest was so heavy, and I was trying to cope with all of this. After the funeral, people were at the house giving their condolences. I decided that I needed to take the day and take a dog for his walk. Returning close to home, I heard cicadas up in the trees. Suddenly, I remembered that cicada in her room had not been there when I entered to find her. She had passed away. A few steps later, one of the cicadas flew down the street towards me and hit me squarely in the chest and then fell on the ground. It lay there momentarily and then suddenly flew away. I said to myself, Okay, Mom, I got the message. You're okay. We'll all be okay. So that was my dad's story, and uh you know, it was a very hard time in our life, but it was reassuring, and kind of like Kevin was talking about, how getting a sign to know that things are okay, you know. So it was interesting because like there's an old Polish thing, and I think I shared that maybe even the last episode where they said that like animals are sort of like, vessels for the soul.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, they can be messengers.
yeah.
Absolutely.
I never believe, this is just my personal belief. I never believe that the soul is in the animal, but it's that the soul of your loved one sends the message. It's a messenger. They can,
Yeah.
because it's been said that it's easy to manipulate nature and electricity for spirit on the other side just energetically than it is to, other things. So, yeah, I think that that's definitely a way and a sign. And whenever I see cardinals, like to Kevin's point,
Yeah.
I always think that, hello, we got home from my son's birthday party. He turned 6 the other day, and literally there was a cardinal just waiting for us on our garage never seen that before. Just
Yeah.
sitting on the garage waiting, the brightest red cardinal you've ever seen. And I tried to get a picture. And just as I got my phone out to get him, he flew away. And I'm like, no, but
Yeah.
we all saw it and we were all like, who is it? You know, who is saying? And I felt like it was my husband's grandma, but you know, or grandpa, excuse me. But you know, who knows who it was.
Yeah.
Just a lovely hello from heaven. It could have been all of them, who knows.
Yeah.
But
I just
yeah,
hope, I hope I come back as a tiger, or I have a tiger that takes me.
tiger. I feel like that would scare your family, like,
Feel
oh,
kinda-
is dad okay? And then a tiger shows up.
right? Tiger shows up, takes my soul away. I guess it has to be something a little bit more feasible, like a hawk or a falcon or something. But like, that'd be a statement. A little bit bigger than a cicada bug. Sorry, Grandma. A little
Yeah,
bit bigger than that. Just a tiger escaped from the zoo and is found next to a hospital.
that's dad.
It's Dad.
I know you're okay, Dad. Thanks for sending that tiger to eat me.
So,
That's
but
funny.
yeah, well, I have to make it a little light, right?
Mm,
Yeah. So,
yeah. Well, that was a really nice story, and thank your dad for sharing it as well, please.
yeah,
Unless,
definitely will.
unless he's listening. Thank you, Nick's dad, for
Yeah.
sharing that with us.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Pop.
it was very special. Yeah, I'm sure that was not an easy time for anyone.
No, but again, like kind of going back to what Kevin's book is trying to do, it was a moment to make us feel, better, and there was some closure, and there was like, okay, things are okay. And I think, stories aside, that's a great message to kind of get out of this particular episode, is that, we're all going to be okay after things that like this happens. And
Yep.
and I love the other trend that seemed to be happening with a lot of the subjects in Kevin's books, is that we're trying to spread that message around, that there is more to come, and that everything's going to be okay.
Yeah, I think we just want to, if somebody's listening to this podcast, they're interested, right? They
Right.
they want to know, like they probably already believe that there's something going on. They probably have a story themselves, or they want a story themselves, that sort of thing. I think I mentioned on the podcast before that, I listen to paranormal podcasts, and I have for probably like 10 or more years, um, just to know that I'm not crazy, that these things that I experienced my entire life as an intuitive,
Mhm.
outside of being told it was evil for the first,
Yep.
25 years of my life, and believing that I wasn't crazy, and that these things really do happen. And when you listen to that many paranormal podcasts, you start to pick up the threads of similarities, right? Like, wow, I've heard a story just like this before. I've heard several stories just like this before. Like when the soul, I just heard another one the other day where somebody's soul left the body and somebody heard a pop, and and somebody was sucked out from their soul. And near death experiences, same thing. People feel like they're being sucked up through a tube, or all of a sudden everything's black, or all of a sudden they're standing in black. Any of those things. So, but there's a thread, multiple threads of similarities between these stories. And you say, like, that can't be coincidence. All of these people, hundreds of people over the,
Yep. Yep.
how could that be? So to me, yeah, I find it validating and comforting to me to know that, like, what's going on within me and outside of me are real,
Mhm.
and not everybody's going to believe it, but I have to also live my truth, and they can live theirs, and we're all on different paths and different journeys, and our soul journeys, and wherever you are, that's okay. um it's just a matter of accepting other people's beliefs, opinions, and respecting where they are. So that's what I like about our podcast.
Yeah. Nicely said. Nicely said. Well,
Thanks.
I think we're coming up on the end here. Kevin, again, thank you for being on the show, for sharing your stories.
Yes, thank
Um,
you.
Oh,
Do you
you're
want to
entirely welcome. Thank you.
do you want to show your book for the people that actually do
yeah.
watch?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, a lot of people
Sure.
just listen, but just in case, I want to
Let's
see
see if I can get it.
That's
There you
perfect.
go.
All
Okay.
right. You want to just say it again and where people can find you?
Sure, it's Signs. The veil is thinner than we imagine. And you can find me at kevin-hall.com. That's my website. You can get a download there of the story of Ron DeFrancesco in 9/11. And the books are available at Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and many, many other sites out there. There's an ebook as well as a paperback book.
Wonderful. That's
Awesome.
so exciting. Thank you so much again.
Thank you. I really
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Well, Nick, is it that time?
Yeah, I think it's that time, Jess.
All right. Well, whether it's ghosts or bourbon, everybody just keep your spirits up.